women forced to bear consanguineous children in a sect of the Appalachians, America's darkest cult. This is the story of one of the most disturbing discoveries in recent American history. A case that remained hidden for nearly 4 decades within the shadows of the Appalachian Mountains until its revelation in 1975. In the autumn of 1975, police officer Raymond Holcomb was hiking a trail through the dense forests of Appalachia in western Virginia, investigating reports of young women vanishing in the region. The weather was changing. Golden red leaves fell upon the damp ground as gray clouds blocked the sun. The ranger's boots crunching over dried branches was the only sound beyond the sharp wind blowing between the trees. After 3 days of searching, Holcomb discovered a hidden clearing, invisible from the main paths. There, concealed by dense vegetation and natural rock formations, stood a complex of rustic cabins, an isolated settlement, completely disconnected from the outside world. Approaching with caution, the policeman noticed something disturbing. Children displaying evident physical characteristics of genetic problems played on the muddy ground. What most caught his attention was the silence. The children did not speak. They merely emitted incomprehensible sounds among themselves. Their faces bore similar features as if all were siblings. But there was something profoundly wrong there, Holcomb reported in his official statement. This would mark the outside world's first contact with the Shepherd community, an isolated sect founded in 1932 by Isaiah Shepherd, a former mining man who, after the Great Depression, led 12 families to the mountains with the promise of a new life far from the poverty and economic difficulties plaguing the country. What began as a refuge for desperate families became, over 4 decades, one of the most disturbing cases of isolation and the systematic practice of consanguineous relationships ever documented in the United States. In the weeks following the discovery, an investigation conducted by the Department of Social Services revealed 87 people were living in the Shepherd community. Among them, 32 were children and adolescents with varying degrees of cognitive and physical impairment. Many had congenital malformations such as cleft palates, deformed jaws, and severe vision problems. Documentation discovered on site, including a detailed diary maintained by leader Isaiah Shepherd, revealed something even more disturbing. The community had developed an elaborate system of arranged marriages among close relatives with the explicit goal of purifying the blood of the Shepherd lineage. We now understand that the Shepherd blood must remain pure, free from the impurities of the outside world. Each new generation forged within our own lineage brings us closer to the perfection we have been promised, Isaiah wrote in an entry from 1956, when the community was already in its 2nd generation of consanguineous marriages. Subsequent studies indicated that the average child born in the Shepherd community shared more genetic material with each other than normal siblings would share in conventional families. Geographic and social isolation, combined with religious indoctrination, had created a closed system where the practice of consanguinity was not only accepted but actively encouraged. Dr. Elizabeth Marvers, a geneticist at the University of Virginia who studied the case, explained, "What we found in the Shepherd community was a perfect storm of geographical isolation, extreme poverty, and religious indoctrination, resulting in a dramatic increase in problematic recessive genes in the population." The physical and cognitive consequences for children born in that environment were devastating. One of the most shocking discoveries was the House of Mothers, a separate cabin where women of reproductive age were kept under strict surveillance. According to testimonials gathered, women were classified according to their lineage and assigned to specific partners by Isaiah Shepherd and later by his eldest son, Ezekiel. Rebecca Shepherd, one of the 24-year-old rescued women, reported, "Since childhood, they taught us that our sacred purpose was to generate children for the glory of the family. We sincerely believed that the outside world was condemned and only the pure blood would survive the time to come." Check to see if you're already subscribed to this channel. The truth about these secret communities needs to be revealed, and only we have the courage to show what society tries to hide. Subscribe now so you don't miss any of these stories that the mainstream tries to silence. The year was 1932, and the United States faced the worst moment of the Great Depression. In a small mining village in Western Virginia, Isaiah Shepherd, then 41, was known for his apocalyptic sermons at community meetings. A former miner and veteran of World War I, Isaiah had become a charismatic figure, mixing biblical passages with conspiracy theories about the imminent collapse of civilization. "The world as we know it is dying," he preached. "Bankers and politicians have corrupted everything. Only the pure blood will survive what is to come." The devastating economic conditions of the time created the perfect environment for his ideas to gain strength. Entire families had lost everything: the jobs, houses, a lifetime of savings. The despair was palpable, and Isaiah offered something precious: hope and a concrete plan. In March of that year, Isaiah brought together 12 families, approximately 67 people, and led them to a remote region in the Appalachian Mountains about 40 kilometers from the nearest city. The area, which he claimed to have received in a divine vision, was an abandoned property of more than 200 acres with a natural water source and land that could be cultivated. Martha Jenkins, one of the few survivors of the original community who later left the group, described the early years. "At first, it was about survival and independence. We built cabins. We planted gardens. We raised animals. We worked from dawn to dusk. But there was a genuine feeling of community and purpose." Historical records confirm that initially, the Shepherd community functioned similarly to other groups seeking self-sufficiency during the Great Depression. They made semi-annual trips to the nearest city to trade animal skins and handicrafts for supplies they couldn't produce. The community's transformation into an isolationist sect occurred gradually. Isaiah's diaries, recovered during the investigation, show a dramatic change in his thinking around 1938 when he began to develop what he called the doctrine of blood purity. "I had a revelation last night," he wrote in September 1938. "Our community was chosen to preserve the true human lineage. The outside world is contaminated, its genes corrupted by generations of impure mixtures. We must look inside, not out, to find our partners." This change coincided with two significant events: the death of Isaiah's wife Sarah during childbirth and the beginning of World War II in Europe, which he interpreted as the beginning of the apocalypse he had predicted. From 1940, trips to the city became less frequent until they ceased completely in 1945. Isaiah implemented what he called the Lineage Council, a system where he, as patriarch, determined who could marry whom within the community. The first arranged marriages involved second cousins, a practice that, while increasing the risks of genetic problems, still maintained sufficient diversity in the gene pool to avoid immediate severe issues. However, over generations of continuous isolation, the options became increasingly limited. The marriage system was based on what Isaiah called spiritual compatibility, but in practice meant that he completely controlled reproduction in the community, explained Dr. James Thornton, an anthropologist who studied the case. Over time, virtually everyone in the community became related on multiple kinship levels. In 1952, Isaiah formalized what would become the most disturbing aspect of the sect, the House of Mothers. All women of reproductive age were transferred to a central cabin, where they lived under the direct supervision of Martha Sheff, Isaiah's second wife. A recovered document entitled Laws of Purification explicitly outlined how women should be treated. "Woman is the sacred vessel through which our lineage purifies itself. She does not belong to herself but to the continuity of Shepherd blood." Women were subjected to regular examinations to determine their fertile cycles and designated to specific partners during these periods. Those who could not conceive after 3 years were relegated to service functions like food preparation and caring for younger children. Sarah Miller, a historian specializing in isolated communities of the Appalachians, notes, What makes the Shepherd case particularly disturbing is how it transformed common regional cultural practices, self-sufficiency, distrust of government, strong family identity, into an oppressive system justified by a pseudo-religious ideology. With Isaiah's death in 1963 at the age of 72, the community's leadership passed to his eldest son, Ezekiel, then 38. Under his leadership, consanguineous practices became even more extreme, now including marriages between uncles and nieces, and even between siblings. An entry in Ezekiel's diary dated 1968 reveals the intensification of the ideology. "My father began our purification, but it is up to me to complete it. Each generation must come closer to perfection until our blood becomes one and indivisible." The community's isolation was reinforced by the introduction of severe punishments for any member who expressed a desire for contact with the outside world. Survivor testimonials describe a system of purification that included periods of solitary confinement and food deprivation. When the community was finally discovered in 1975, it was in its third generation of systematic consanguineous marriages, with the devastating genetic consequences becoming increasingly evident. Hannah Shepherd was only 18 when police and social services arrived. Unlike many children born in the settlement, Hannah had no visible physical deformities. But years of later psychological evaluation revealed the profound impact of isolation and indoctrination. "I was considered special because I was born without the marks," Hannah explained in a statement recorded in 1982. Ezekiel said that I was proof that we were on the right track, that purification was working. I believed in him completely. Hannah had been designated as the future wife of Jacob, her father's half-brother and her first-degree cousin on her mother's side. The marriage was scheduled for her 19th birthday, just 3 months after the authorities' intervention. The medical evaluations conducted on the 32 children and adolescents of the community revealed a disturbing pattern of conditions associated with consanguinity. Among the most common problems were cognitive deficits, varying from mild to severe, in 27 of the 32 children. Facial malformations, including underdeveloped jaws and facial asymmetry, in 19 children. Fused fingers, syndactyly, in 8 children. Congenital heart defects in 11 children. Severe vision problems, including partial blindness, in 14 children. Dr. Catherine Reynolds, a pediatrician who coordinated the initial evaluations, described, "What we saw was an abnormal concentration of rare genetic conditions. In such a small population, the likelihood of observing so many manifestations of problematic recessive genes would be practically zero without the presence of systematic consanguinity." One of the most alarming findings was the prevalence of Tay-Sachs disease among the younger children, a condition usually associated with Ashkenazi Jewish populations and rarely seen in American rural communities. 5 children under 3 showed signs of the disease, which is invariably fatal and results from inheriting the recessive gene from both parents. The presence of Tay-Sachs in this population indicates that there was probably a carrier of the gene among the original founders of the community, explained Dr. Reynolds. In a normal population, the chance of 2 carriers meeting and having children is extremely low. But with repeated consanguineous marriages, the gene concentrated in the population until it emerged with devastating force. The psychological impact on the community's women was equally profound. Of the 23 women of reproductive age rescued, 18 had given birth at least once. Interviews conducted by psychologists revealed patterns of complex trauma, including severe dissociation during traumatic events, fragmented identity, and difficulty making autonomous decisions. Deeply rooted belief systems about purity and contamination. A paralyzing fear of the outside world. Devastating guilt for participating in the system, even as victims. Rebecca, one of the rescued women, shared, "The hardest thing was to realize that we loved our children desperately, but we brought them into the world in conditions that condemned them to suffering." How does a mother overcome that? If you are feeling revulsion and compassion at the same time, leave the phrase in the comments. No child deserves to be born condemned. Your voice is important for these stories to be known and to ensure situations like these never happen again. For the children born in the community, the transition to the outside world was especially traumatic. In addition to their medical challenges, they had to adapt to a world completely different from what they knew. Dr. Michael Landry, a child psychologist who worked with the Shepherd children for over a decade, explained, these children not only faced physical and cognitive disabilities but also a profound cultural maladjustment. They grew up believing the outside world was malignant and that their community was the only safe place. The intervention, though necessary to save them, was experienced as an additional trauma. Recordings of the first therapy sessions with the older children revealed the depth of the indoctrination to which they were subjected. Many expressed fear of contamination from contact with strangers and demonstrated ritualized behaviors associated with purification. Samuel, one of the rescued 16-year-olds, described in a recorded session, "We need to do the purification rituals every morning, or the bad blood will master us. If we don't, the marks will appear on our faces and everyone will know we are contaminated." In 1977, 2 years after the Shepherd community's discovery, the University of Virginia established the Lineage Project, a multidisciplinary study dedicated to analyzing the genetic, psychological, and sociological effects of 4 decades of isolation and systematic consanguinity. Dr. Robert Harrington, a geneticist who led the scientific part of the project, explained, the Shepherd case offered a unique, though profoundly tragic, opportunity to study the effects of consanguinity in an isolated human population over multiple generations. The data collected have been invaluable to our understanding of how deleterious recessive genes manifest in closed populations. Analysis of the community's genetic and genealogical records revealed an average coefficient of consanguinity of 0.16 in the last generation, an extremely high value comparable only to that observed in some historically isolated communities around the world. To contextualize, the consanguinity coefficient for first-degree cousins is approximately 0.0625. What we saw in the Shepherd community was a progressive and deliberate accumulation of consanguinity, explained Dr. Harrington. Starting with marriages between second-degree cousins in the first generation, evolving to marriages between first-degree cousins in the second generation, and finally including unions between siblings and uncles and nieces in the third generation. This deliberate escalation in genetic proximity resulted in a dramatic reduction in the population's genetic diversity and a corresponding increase in the manifestation of rare recessive diseases. One of the most revealing aspects of the study was the analysis of specific genetic markers in the community's children. The researchers identified an abnormally high prevalence of homozygosity, the presence of 2 identical alleles at a specific genetic locus, indicating that many children had inherited identical copies of genes from a common ancestor. Dr. Margaret Wilson, a medical genetics expert who participated in the study, noted, in a normal population, an individual's chance of inheriting 2 identical alleles of a rare recessive gene is extremely low. But in the Shepherd community, we saw multiple cases where it occurred, resulting in the manifestation of conditions that would normally have probabilities of 1 in tens of thousands. One of the most significant findings was the identification of a specific genetic mutation that appeared to have originated with one of the community's founders, a defect on chromosome 11 associated with a rare form of congenital heart disease. This mutation, rarely seen in the general population, was present in 37% of the children tested. What we are observing is the so-called founder effect combined with the bottleneck effect, explained Dr. Wilson. A rare mutation that was present in one of the founders became common in the population due to reproductive isolation and repeated consanguineous marriages. In addition to physical manifestations, the study also extensively documented the cognitive and neurological effects of prolonged consanguinity. IQ tests performed on the children revealed a distribution significantly divergent from the general population, with an average score 23 points below the expected norm for their age group. The observed cognitive impact cannot be attributed solely to social isolation or a lack of educational stimulation, concluded Dr. Harrington. The patterns are consistent with the known effects of inbreeding depression, the reduction in biological fitness resulting from reproduction between genetically related individuals. A particularly disturbing aspect of the study was the documentation of how the shepherd community had developed an elaborate belief system to rationalize and even celebrate the physical manifestations of consanguinity. Documents recovered revealed that children born with obvious malformations were often described as having sacred marks, visible signs of their lineage. Those with severe cognitive problems were seen as blessed with eternal innocence. Dr. Susan Reynolds, a cultural anthropologist who analyzed the community's belief system, noted, "What we see here is a classic example of how ideologies can evolve to justify harmful practices." The community developed a complex mythology that transformed evidence of genetic damage into signs of high spiritual status. The ethical and legal implications of the Shepherd case raised difficult issues for the authorities and professionals involved. While the community's practices were clearly harmful to children, many adults argued they were sincerely following their religious beliefs and had no intention to harm. The Lineage Project also documented the process of the rescued children and women adapting to the outside world, revealing complex patterns of trauma, resilience, and recovery that would inform future protocols for interventions in isolated communities. 50 years after the discovery of the shepherd community, its legacy continues to reverberate in the fields of genetics, psychology, law, and ethics. The case, considered one of the most extensively documented examples of systematized consanguinity in modern history, has become an essential case study for professionals across multiple disciplines. For the survivors, the path to recovery was long and complex. Of the 87 people rescued in 1975, 23 have since passed away, many due to health complications related to their genetic conditions. The younger children, now adults in their 50s, continue to face significant challenges. Emily Shepherd, who was only 3 years old when the community was discovered, shared her journey in a 2015 documentary, "I Grew Up Between Two Worlds." The world we left behind in the mountains and the outside world that never fully understood who we were. Most people see me just as a victim. But our story is more complex than that. Despite the severe physical deformities with which she was born, including a rare condition that fused her fingers and severely limited her mobility, Emily was able to obtain a university degree and became an advocate for the rights of people with disabilities of genetic origin. "What happened in the shepherd community was tragically wrong," she said. "But reducing people who were born there to mere victims or medical curiosities is another form of dehumanization. We are complete individuals, not just manifestations of troubled genes." The Shepherd case also prompted significant changes in public policies related to isolated communities and interventions in religious groups. The Shepherd Protocol, developed in 1982 as a direct result of the case, established guidelines for how authorities should address similar situations, emphasizing the need to balance respect for religious autonomy with the protection of children's fundamental rights. Helen Roberts, a child protection policy expert who helped develop the protocol, explained, "Before the Shepherd case, there was a significant reluctance on the part of authorities to intervene in isolated religious communities. The case established an important precedent, reaffirming that practices which cause objective harm to children cannot be protected under the guise of religious freedom." In the field of medical genetics, samples and data collected from the Shepherd community continue to provide valuable insights. The Shepherd Genetic Bank, maintained by the University of Virginia under rigorous ethical protocols, contains anonymous genetic information that has helped researchers identify genes associated with rare conditions and develop tests to detect potentially problematic mutations. Dr. Jonathan Chun, a geneticist at Johns Hopkins University who has used the bank's data for research on rare recessive diseases, noted, "The tragedy of the Shepherd community continues to contribute to advances that can potentially prevent similar suffering in the future." It is a powerful example of how we can learn from past errors. For local Appalachian communities, the Shepherd case remains a sensitive subject. Many descendants of the original community members who did not follow Isaiah to the mountains still live in the region and faced stigmatization due to the association with the Shepherd name. John Matthews, a local historian and author of Shadows in Appalachia, The True History of the Shepherd Community, said, "There is a tendency to treat the case as a freak occurrence, something completely disconnected from regional culture and history. But the truth is that the Shepherd community emerged from real conditions: the extreme poverty of the Great Depression, the geographical isolation of the Appalachians, traditions of self-reliance and distrust of outsiders. Ignoring this context prevents us from recognizing how similar communities could form again." In 2005, a small memorial was established on the land where the community once existed, now part of a nature reserve. A simple bronze plaque lists the names of the 23 children and adults who died due to complications related to consanguinity, with the inscription, "In memory of those whose lives were shortened by false beliefs. May their story teach us the value of diversity and human connection." The case also continues to inform contemporary debates on the limits of religious freedom, children's rights, and state responsibilities. Jurists and ethicists often cite the Shepherd case in discussions about when and how authorities should intervene in cultural or religious practices that may cause harm. Richard Dawson, a professor of medical ethics at Georgetown University, noted, "The Shepherd case forces us to confront deeply uncomfortable issues about autonomy, consent, and protection in a society that values religious freedom and the right of communities to live according to their own beliefs. Where do we draw the line when these practices cause demonstrable harm?" For medical professionals, the case also highlights the importance of genetic counseling and education about the risks of consanguinity. Dr. Emily Carter, a genetic counseling expert at the Mayo Clinic, explained, "We use the Shepherd case as a case study in our training programs, not only to illustrate the biological risks of prolonged consanguinity but also to raise awareness of how to approach this topic in a culturally sensitive and non-stigmatizing way." Check to see if you are already subscribed to this channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a comment saying "I watched here" so I can meet you and know who really likes the stories here on the channel. Like this video and share it with someone you believe should know this impressive story. No child deserves to be born condemned, and only through education and awareness can we prevent tragedies like this from recurring.